In this video, I'm going to show you how to fold some beautiful origami tessellations by combining tiles of the hydrangea designed by Shuzo Fujimoto. I first learned about this technique from Peter Budai's wonderful guide, which you can download for free from happyfolding.com. I'll start with explaining how the tiling technique works and how to alter the pattern to get a low, intermediate or high density tiling and even more variations. Then I'll show you how to fold the low density tiling, but in such a way that it also explains how to fold other densities. So let's get started. I'll try to keep the section on the theory relatively short, but if you'd like a more in-depth view, you can check out the tessellation guide I posted back in 2011. It's a great resource, especially if you want to start designing your own tessellation patterns. In essence, it talks about molecules and which requirements they have to meet so that you can repeat them to receive a tessellation. The hydrangea tiling we're looking at today is one example of such a molecule. When talking about a molecule, it's really helpful to look at its crease pattern. This is the one for the basic hydrangea. The pattern is especially easy to tessellate because it's very symmetrical. So creating a tessellation is as easy as folding multiple hydrangeas next to each other. So, for example, if we combine 4 hydrangeas in a 2x2 grid, we get this crease pattern. And indeed, this is the crease pattern for the low density tiling of the hydrangea. Easy, right? But how do we get other densities? Well, you can see these mountain folds right here. That's where the tiles meet. If we change that distance, we receive a different density. If we halve the distance, then the intermediate density tiling is the result. And if we eliminate the section completely, we get the high density tiling. Of course, you could also increase that distance, for example, if you wanted to fold a nicely decorated frame for a photo. And you can vary the distances of the tiles within one tessellation too. So really you've got lots of options to make it your own. Now, by shortening these creases, you're moving the tiles closer to each other and essentially overlapping the crease patterns of separate tiles. But you could also see it as a modification of the molecule itself. For the intermediate density tiling, we reduced the size of the border, and for the high density tiling, we even removed the border completely. Of course, you can vary the size of the border just on the outside edge too. There's lots of room to play here. And while I only showed crease patterns for 4 tiles here, you can easily extend this concept to, for example, fold 6 or 9 tiles, or even more. Collapsing the model definitely gets trickier, and you'll need larger paper, but the concept stays the same. But I promise to try and keep this short, so let's keep it at that. One final note perhaps. All 3 crease patterns look very similar, and so it's probably not a big surprise that folding them is very similar too. The main difference lies in which grid you fold before adding the diagonal crease lines that determine the placement of the tiles. For the low density tiling with 4 hydrangeas, you'll require a 16 division square grid. Not all creases on the grid are strictly necessary, but it's much easier to fold the model if you start with a full grid. So at least for your first fold, I highly recommend doing that. For the mid-density tiling with 4 hydrangeas, we need 1 division less, so 15 divisions. And for the high-density tiling, you need just 14 divisions. Collapsing the high-density tiling is just a little trickier because in one step some sections of 2 adjoining tiles will overlap. That's why I recommend that you try the low or intermediate density first, just so that you understand the concept. Once you have that, the overlapping sections should be quite easy to handle too. And if you're wondering which step that is exactly, I'll reference it while folding the low-density tiling just in case. I hope that gives you at least some insight into the tiling technique and how to vary it. So let's get folding. As mentioned, I'll show you how to fold the low density tiling, so we'll need a 16 division square grid. And depending on which density and how many tiles you want to fold, you'll have to adjust the number of divisions. I'll speed through folding the grid here, but if you're unsure how to fold one, I've got a separate video that explains how you can fold one nicely and precisely. And precision is key in getting a beautiful tessellation. Now once that grid is done, we need to add the diagonal pre-creasing. We'll add these in the right direction, so as a mountain folds on the color side, to make it easier to collapse the hydrangea tiles. I highly recommend you do that too. Now, starting from a corner, count in 2 square diagonals. That's where the first crease needs to go. So you'll see you have 4 grid sections visible here. And then crease just the 2 central diagonals. Now, count up 2 further square diagonals. That's where you need to place the paper next to add the second pre-creasing. And this time, crease the diagonals of 4 grid squares. Next, check where that first shorter crease ends. Right in that point, let's add a longer diagonal. This one needs to be 4 grid diagonals long again. Always use the grid intersections to determine where to crease to get nice, precise results. The more precisely you fold the grid and the diagonals, the more stunning your final model will be, so it's worth taking your time here. Again, this crease needs to be 4 diagonals long. Let's add that crease to the other end of the shorter diagonal too. By the way, these pre-creases are the same irrespective of which density and how many tiles you want to add. That's determined by the grid divisions. And once you've added the second crease of 4 grid diagonals, let's connect both to form a rectangle. Double check the location before you add the crease by counting the diagonals of the grid squares and add a short crease through 2 diagonals. Now we want to repeat the process to create another triangle. Let's first add the shorter creases and then connect them to complete the second triangle. Here you can see one of the rectangles we just pre-creased, and the other one. Now add those creases to the other 3 corners for the 2x2 tiling. Of course, if you want to add even more tiles, then you have to add even more rectangles. And if you're unsure where to place the first creases, double check the location on the crease pattern. It's not the end of the world if you accidentally add creases in the wrong place, but the model won't look as clean in the end, and collapsing the tiles might be a bit more difficult. So taking your time and focusing to avoid mistakes is definitely worth it. And once the pre-creasing is done, the fun part begins. We'll start by collapsing just one tile into a hydrangea base. It definitely helps if you folded one before, and I've got a detailed tutorial for that. So if you haven't folded the basic hydrangea yet, do that now. But I'll still include some pointers here, just not as many details. First, locate a corner of one of the rectangles we just added. Start a mountain fold in that corner using a crease on the grid, and one on the other corner too. Those 2 creases will have 2 grid rows between each other. Now bring them together to form a valley fold between them like this, and then do the same for the other corners of the rectangles. The next 2 are very short mountain folds, and the last set has long mountain folds again. Now bring them all into shape at the same time. Take a look at this point, it goes inwards, and this one doesn't. I'm going to push on that point so that it points inwards too. The same here, and that one's okay already. So this is the shape we want before we collapse a tile. Notice that there are valley folds here and mountain folds there. Now pinch the mountain folds that end in the corners of the rectangles, both on the left and the right. Pinch all the way in and then rotate the model and repeat that again. This is what it looks like from the back. Now completely flatten that section by pushing the paper down all the way. Now we can open up those valley folds again. Here's one, and do the same for the other 3. Now one hydrangea base is done. You should be able to see a nice and precise square popping up on the back. Now we want to collapse the next hydrangea base. Let's first open up the paper a bit again. We don't want to flatten it completely, so that the structure of the first tile stays relatively intact. Again, add the mountain folds up to the corners of the rectangles. By the way, this last one is joined to the tile we already collapsed. Now push in the points again, reinforce the mountain folds if needed, and press the creases into place until you get that 3D shape again. Always make sure that there are valley folds around this section of 4 grid squares. These adjoining triangles will fold onto that section. Ensure all creases have the right direction and then collapse the next hydrangea base, again opening up the valley folds to flatten the model. And this is what the back looks like now. Let's move on to the next tile. As before, form those mountain folds to start making that 3D shape appear. Unfold the collapsed tiles as much as required and push the paper into place. Then you can flatten the third tile. And this is the model from the back now. Finally, let's work on the fourth tile. Some of the mountain folds are already in place, so this one should go fairly easily. And then flatten all of the hydrangea bases. Now your basic tiling is done, and there's the back. Here's a closer look at one of the corners of those popped up squares. I find it easiest to now start preparing the border of the tessellation, so let's form these corners first. For this we need to inside reverse fold the corners. I prefer not to pre-crease this so that I can ensure the tips come to a nice point. Then flatten the reverse fold to complete the crease. And repeat on the other side. And then all the way around. Now these sections are diamond shaped. Next, let's pre-crease these diamonds, so for this, fold the diamond in half and then fold up the point to the next grid line, essentially folding half the diamond in half again. Unfold and repeat on the other half of the diamond, like this. These long sections also have to be pre-creased. Again, fold in half and then fold the edge to the next grid line and add a strong crease. Then repeat on the other half. Like this, and repeat on all of the other sections. Once that's done, flip over the model. We need to sink the corners of this square so that we can add the second layer of the hydrangea. The even smaller petals are formed by repeating the steps we'll do now, just on an even smaller square later on. So, to sink these corners, first fold in the corners to the center. Make sure to work precisely here, because the more precisely you fold these, the more layers you can add and the more symmetrical the petals will be in the end. Then go between these layers on both sides and fold the triangle in half while letting that section pop up. Then pull carefully to get a straight edge. Repeat on the other side. Then flatten to reveal a perfect square. Now lift the sides to fold the square back down with 2 small inside reverse folds in place. Now your open sink is done. You need to repeat this on all the corners of the raised squares. To demonstrate the look of the different number of layers, I'll just sink the corners of 3 of the squares. So in the end you can also see what a hydrangea tile looks like if you don't add any additional layers. This will be the case for this square. Let's continue working on the additional layers of the other 3 squares. First, open these petals and then push this layer up so that the paper lies flat again. Then push this paper out to collapse it like this. You'll add some new creases here. And repeat. And in case you're wondering, it works exactly the same on these longer sections. Repeat for the other tiles too. Now I mentioned before that for the high density tiling there will be some overlapping, and this is the step. The inner sections will overlap a little when you perform this step, but just on the first additional layer. Don't worry about the overlapping though. As soon as we complete the next step, it will disappear. And that overlapping won't occur if you add even more layers, so you only have to worry about it once. But now let's get back to completing the petals of this layer. We need to pull out some paper to reveal that next layer of petals. I like to grab this layer right here and pull it out carefully until you can see a pyramid. Then pinch the sides together and ensure you reach the grid intersections, just to get nice precision. And flatten completely, like this. Repeat on the other side. First pull out to get a pyramid and then flatten it down. And of course repeat all the way around. I actually love this step and I hope you enjoy it too. And this is what the tile looks like when the next layer is exposed. Then repeat on the other tiles. Now we want to add those pre-creasings on this layer too. So fold the diamond in half and then fold the corner out. And repeat a bunch of times. Then the second layer of petals is done. Now if you want to add even more layers, flip the model over and start sinking the corners of the smaller squares. I'll do this on 2 of the tiles only. The procedure is the same as before, but everything's just a little bit smaller. Then flip over the model again and open these sections to fold out the paper. As you can see, the steps are the same here too, just smaller. Of course, the paper you can grab onto gets smaller too, but at this size I can still manage fine without using a tool. And repeat on all of the other sections. And once all the petals are pulled out and flattened, let's add the pre-creasing for the final shaping again. Smaller too, of course. So now we have a tile with 1, 2 and 3 layers. Let's add a 4th layer on the last tile. You know the drill by now. First sink the corners of this even smaller square. Then prepare the model for pulling out the next layer of petals and pull them out. The layer to grab onto is really small now, so I'm going to get some tweezers. Like this, I can grab hold of the small layer and carefully pull it out. Then collapse the pyramid shape again to reveal half a petal. And repeat on all of the other sections. Finally, form the petals. As this is the last layer, you can keep the petals folded. Make strong creases as they tend to unfold. We lock them in a moment though, and then they'll stay nicely in place. The smallest layer has its final shape now. Beautiful, right? Now next, we'll shape the layer underneath. I'll use my tweezers for this so that my fingers don't hide the paper too much. Basically, fold behind the corner of the second smallest diamond along the pre-creasing, like this. Repeat all the way around. You can also shape the next layer already, but let's keep the last layer as it is for now. We'll come back to it after we shape the petals of the other tiles. You can of course shape the petals without tweezers too, but as you can see, my fingers cover most of the paper because it's all quite small. The next layer is a bit larger, so maybe it's a bit more visible. But I hope you saw where the paper needs to go while I was using the tweezers. And now we can start shaping the largest petals. I'll try to show you in detail where the paper lies after, right here. And repeat. Now let's look at these long sections which connect 2 tiles. As before, push behind the paper and do the same on the other side. Then flatten the paper completely, strengthening the crease. Now repeat on all the other petals. Finally, we need to finish the border of the tessellation. Ensure that the largest petals have their points folded behind and then flip over the model. Now take this corner and fold it in half. So this is what you get. And repeat on the other corner. Now you have formed a large petal. And of course repeat all the way around. If any of the petals unfolded, refold them now. We'll secure those in the next and final step. We'll now shape this long edge. As before, fold in the corners. So it looks like this. And repeat all the way around. Then flip the model over, double check if any corners unfolded, and there you have it. 1 layer, 2, 3 and 4. Your low density tiling of the hydrangea designed by Shuzo Fujimoto is all done. And once you've folded this tiling, start experimenting with all of the variations that I hinted at in the first part of the video. And if you liked this video, do let me know by giving it a thumbs up, commenting below, and sharing it with others. Plus, if you love the hydrangea as much as me, you'll want to check out my playlist of other videos on this model, or explore other origami tessellations in my playlist for that. Finally, subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss my next videos. I hope to see you around, and as always, happy folding!